The Lord has revealed to the nations his saving power. Our psalm today sounds universal and speaking of all the nations. But to the Jewish audience in the original Hebrew, it would have been almost scandalous, because the word that is used for nations was goyim, which means Gentiles or outsiders. So it's not just the Lord has revealed to the nations, the Lord has revealed to everyone his saving power, but the Lord has revealed to those not among his chosen people his saving power. And this theme of outsiders is present in all of our readings this morning, especially the Gospel and the first reading. Jesus recognizes that it is the Samaritan, the foreigner, who is the only one out of the 10 lepers he healed, who returns to give him thanks and praise. And the Gospel has close parallels to the story in our first reading of Naaman the Syrian. Naaman was a military commander in Syria, and since he was afflicted with leprosy, went to Israel seeking the healing of Elisha. And Naaman had some expectations for his journey. He expected this prophet to use magic words and potions and maybe some magic dances and incantations. This is what was done at virtually every other kingdom and every other prophet and every other magician in the known world. However, when Naaman gets to Elisha, he is simply told to go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. He points out that there are much cleaner rivers in Syria, and wonders why he had to come all this way for someone to tell him to take a bath in a muddy river. He had hoped for some of that incantation or mystical medicine. But his servant reminds Naaman that he would have happily followed strange or difficult advice, so what harm is there in following this simple advice? And in today's reading, we hear of his miraculous healing. But when he goes back to Elisha, he makes a startling profession of faith. Most other outsiders or Gentiles who witness the power of Israel's God in the Old Testament simply remark on how mighty Israel's God is, or how fortunate Israel is to have such a God. Naaman actually says, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel." He realizes that the gods of Syria and Egypt and Greece and every other kingdom don't even exist. And then he says, "I will no longer offer holocaust or sacrifice to any other god except to the Lord." The irony here is that Elisha had been trying to get the king and the people of Israel to admit this very truth for a long time. The people of God had fallen into idols and false gods, but this foreigner had recognized the truth. But then Naaman realizes right after our reading today that when he goes back to Syria, he will be an outsider. Everyone there will be happily worshiping the false gods of the Syrians, and he will have to live in their midst, knowing what he knows. He came to Israel as an outsider and returns to Syria not as a man returning home, but as an outsider in his own homeland. That is why, part of the reason why, he wants to take 2 mule loads of earth, so that he can remember this moment and have a connection to his adopted homeland. And in Paul's letter to Timothy that we hear today, he gives us insight on how this is important for every Christian. He tells Timothy that every Christian is meant to be an outsider, and that the Romans want to eliminate Christianity, and that persecution and martyrdom are a real risk. Paul literally writes this letter from prison. But the understanding of a Christian as an outsider is not something that was prompted by Rome's persecutions, because we too are outsiders. We should live our lives in the world, but not of the world. In some ways, that's harder for us to see living in a society that is a majority Christian society, but it is no less true. The letter to Diognetus is an early Christian document written sometime between 130 and 200 AD. And the author speaks about Christians in the world, and I'd like to read a little bit about what is said there. Christians are indistinguishable from other men either by nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a strange dialect, or follow some outlandish way of life. And yet, there is something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. They pass their days upon earth, but they are citizens of heaven. Obedient to the laws, they yet live on a level that transcends the law. In Paul's letter, we hear, if we have died with him, we shall also live with him. And he doesn't just mean the death of martyrdom, he means the death of baptism. When we descend into the waters of the font, we die to the world. And when we emerge, we are given new life, even if that new life isn't fully realized yet. And I think that we should all strive to be like Naaman, to come to God who offers the healing that we seek, but often not in the way that we expected. An encounter that should make it impossible to return to our old lives unchanged. But sometimes we might feel like Naaman before he was healed, wondering how can 1 hour a week make such a difference in our lives? How can jumping into a muddy river cure leprosy? And like Naaman, we sometimes need to be reminded that we spend a lot of money and time seeking happiness and fulfillment in crazier ways than this. Naaman took home 2 mule loads of earth to help him worship God. But we don't need shovels and mules to do the same. When we bring prayer, the rosary, scripture, or even digital resources into our lives, we are bringing a piece of our new homeland back into our earthly dwelling, to remind us always that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel.